A few evenings after she had taken over St. Angelo, wearing some armor over her gown, she marched along the ramparts of the castle. It gave her a feeling of great power, so far above the city, looking down at the frantic men below, helpless to fight against her. A single woman hobbled by pregnancy, hobbled by pregnancy, when an when an envoy of cardinal who was organizing the conclave to elect the new pope was sent to negotiate with her and seemed reluctant to agree to her condition of surrender. With her and seemed reluctant to agree to her condition of surrender. She shouted down from ramparts, so all could hear. So the cardinal wants a battle of wits with me. Does he? What he doesn't understand is that I have the brains of Duke Galeazzo and I am as brilliant as he. As she waited for their response, she knew she controlled the situation. Her only fear was that her husband would surrender and betray her, or that the August heat would make her too ill to wait it out. Finally, sensing her resolve, a group of cardinals came to the castle of negotiate, and they accede to her, demand. The following morning, as the drawbridge was lowered to let the countess leave the castle, she noticed an enormous crowd pushing close to her. Romans of all classes had come to catch a glimpse of the woman who had controlled Rome for 11 days. Come to catch a glimpse of woman who had controlled Rome for 11 days. They had taken the countess for rather frivolous young woman, addicted to clothes, the pop's little pet. Now they stared at her in astonishment. She was wearing one of her silk gowns with a heavy sword dangling from a man's belt. Her pregnancy more than evident. They had never seen such a sight. Their title now secure, the count and countess moved to Forli to rule their domain. With no more funds coming from the papacy, Girolamo's main concern was how to get more money, and so he increased the taxes on his subject, stirring up much discontent in the process. And so he increased the taxes on his subject, stirring up stirring up much discontent in the process. He quickly made enemies of the powerful Ortiz family in the region. Fearing plots against his life, the Count holed himself up in their palace. Slowly, Katrina took over much of the day to day ruling of their realm. Thinking ahead, she installed a trusted ally as the new commander of the castle Reveldino, which dominated the area. She did everything she could to irritate, ingratiate, ingratiate herself with the locals, but in a few short years, her husband has done too much damage. On April 14, 1488, a group of men, clad in armor and led by Ludovico Orsi, stormed into the palace and stabbed the Count of Death, throwing his body out the window and into the city square. The countess, dining with her family in a nearby room, heard the shouts and quickly shuffled her 6 children into separate rooms in the palace tower. She bolted the door from a window, under which several of her most trusted allies had gathered. She shouted instruction to them. They were to notify the Saffros in Milan and her other allies in the region and urge them to send armies to rescue her. Under no circumstances should the keeper of Ravaldino ever surrender the castle. Within minutes, the assassin had broken into her room. Within minutes, the assassin had broken into her room, taking her and her children captive. Several days later, Ludovico Orsi's and his fellow conspirator Giacomo Del Ronch marched Katrina up to Ravaldino. She was to order the castle's commander to surrender it to the assassin. As the commander, she had installed Tommaso Fio. Looked down from the rampart. Katrina seemed to fear for her life. Her voice breaking with emotion, she begged Fio to give up the fortress, but her voice breaking with emotion, she begged Fio to give up the fortress, but he refused. As the two of them continued their dialogue, Ronch and Orsi sensed the Countess and Fio were playing some sort of game. Talking in code, Ronch had had enough of this. Pressing the sharp edge of his lance tight against her chest, he threatened to run her through unless she got Fio to surrender. And he gave her the sternest glare. Suddenly, the countess' expression changed. She leaned further into the blade, her face inches from Ron, and with a voice dripping with disdain, she told him, oh Giacomo del Ronch, don't you try to frighten me. You can hurt me, but you can't scare me, because I am the daughter of a man who knew no fear. Do what you want. You have killed my lord. You can certainly kill me. After all, I am just a woman. Confounded by her words and demeanor, Ronch and Orsi decided they had to find other means to pressure her. Several days later, Fio communicated with the assassins that he would indeed hand over the fortress, but only if the countess would pay him his back wages and sign a letter absolving him of any guilt for such surrender. Hi, you are from Russia? Oh, welcome, welcome. Hello, Manoj. ডিনার কখন করলেন? হয়ে গেছে, 1 ঘন্টা আগেই করে নিয়েছে। Someone- someone করেছে। Seeing a dog need maybe stand up for me, please. Several days later, Fio communicated with the assassin that he would indeed hand over the fortress, but only if the countess would pay him his back wages and sign a letter absolving him of any guilt for such surrender. Once again, Odyssey. Once again, Orsi and Ronch led her to the castle and watched her closely as she seemed to negotiate with Fio. Finally, Fio insisted that the countess enter the fortress to sign the document. Finally, insisted that the countess enter the fortress to sign the document. He feared the assassins were trying to trick him, and he insisted she enter alone. and he insisted she enter alone. Once the letter was signed, he would do as he had promised. The conspirators, feeling they had no choice, granted his request gave gave the countess a brief time frame to conclude the business. For a fleeting moment, just as they disappeared over the drawbridge into Reveldino, she turned with a sneer and she turned with a sneer and gave the Italian equivalent of the finger to Ronch and Orsi. The entire drama of the past few days had been planned and staged by her and few, with whom she had communicated through various messengers. She knew that the Milanese had sent an army to rescue her, and she only had to play for time. A few hours later, few stood on the ramparts and yelled down that he was holding the countess hostage, and that was that. The enraged assassin had had enough. The next day, they returned to the castle with her 6 children and called Katrina to the rampart, with daggers and spears pointed at them in the most menacing fashion, and with the children wailing and begging for mercy. Wailing and begging for mercy. They ordered Katrina to surrender the fortress or they would kill them all. Surely they had already proven they were more than willing to shed blood. Surely they had already proven they were more than willing to shed blood. She might be fearless and the daughter of a Sforza, but no mother could possibly watch her children die before her eyes. Katrina wasted no time. She shouted down, "Do it then, you fools! I am already pregnant with another child by Count Riario, and I am already pregnant with another child by Count Riario, and I have the means to make more." At which she lifted her skirts as if to emphasize her meaning. Katrina had foreseen the Katrina had foreseen the maneuver with the children and had calculated that the assassin were weak and indecisive. They should have killed her and her family on the first day amid the mayhem. Now they would not dare to kill them in cold blood. The assassin knew that the Sforzas on their way to Forli would take terrible revenge on them if they ever did such a deed. And if she surrendered now, she and her children would all be imprisoned, and some prison would find its way into their food. For and some nahi, and she and her children would all be in prison, and some poison would find its way into their food. She didn't care what they thought of her as a mother. She had to keep stalling. To emphasize her resolve, after refusing to surrender, she had the cannons of the castle. She had the cannons of the castle. She had the cannons of the castle fire at the Orsi place. The 10 days later, a Milanese army arrived to rescue her, and the assassin scattered. The countess was quickly restored to power. The new pope himself confirming her rule as regent until her eldest son, Ottavino, come of age, and as word of all that she had done and what she had yelled down to the assassin from the ramparts of Reveldino spread throughout Italy. The legend of Caterina Sforza, the beautiful warrior Countess of Forli, began to take on a life of its own. Within a year after the death of her husband, the countess had taken a lover, Giacomo Fio, the brother of the commander she had installed in Rivaldino. Giacomo was 7 years younger than Katrina, and he was the polar opposite of Girolamo. Girolamo, handsome and virile. He had come from the lower classes, having served as the stable boy to the Riario family. Most important, he not only loved Katrina, he worshipped her and showed her with attention. The countess had spent her whole life mastering her emotion and subordinating her personal interest to practical matter. Suddenly, feeling herself overwhelmed by Giacomo's affection, she lost her habitual self-control and fell hopelessly in love. She made Giacomo the new commander of Rivaltino. As he now had to live in the castle, she built a palace for herself inside it and soon barely left its confines. Giacomo was decidedly insecure about his status. Katrina had him knighted, and in a secret ceremony they married to allay his self-doubt. She increasingly handed over to him governing power of Follies and Imola, and began to retire from public affairs. She ignored the warning of courtiers and diplomats. The Giacomo was out for himself and was in over his head. She did not listen to her son, who feared Giacomo had plans to get rid of them. Uh, in her eyes, her husband could do no wrong. Then one day in 1495, as she and Giacomo left the castle for a picnic, a group of assassins surrounded her husband and killed him before her eyes. Caught off guard by this action, Katrina reacted with fury. She rounded up the conspirators. She rounded up the conspirators and had them executed and their families imprisoned. In the month after this, she fell into a deep depression, even contemplating suicide. What had happened to her over the past few years? How had she lost her way and given up her power? What had happened to her girlhood, dreams, and the spirit of her father that was her own? Something had clouded her mind. She turned to religion and she returned to ruling her realm. Slowly she recovered. Then one day she received a visit from Giovanni di Medici, a 30-year-old member of the famous family and one of Florence's leading businessmen. He had come to forge commercial ties between the city. More than anyone else, he reminded her of her father. He was handsome, clever, extremely well read, and yet there was a softness to his character. Finally, here was a man who was her equal in knowledge, power, and refinement. The admiration was mutual. Soon they were inseparable, and in 1498 they married. The admiration was mutual. Soon they were inseparable, and in 1498 they married, and uniting two of the most illustrious families in Italy. Now she could finally dream of creating a great regional power. But even beyond her control would spoil her plans. The same year, Giovanni died from the illness, and before she had time to grieve for him, she had to deal with the latest and most dangerous threat of all to her realm. The new Pope Alexander VI, formerly known as Rodrigo Borgia, had his eyes on Folly. He wanted to extend the papal domains through conquest. His son Caesar Borgio serving as the commander of the papal forces. Folly would be a key acquisition for the Pope, and he began to maneuver to politically isolate Katrina for her allies. Katrina for allies. Folly would be a key equation for the Pope, and he began to maneuver to politically isolate Katrina from her allies. To prepare for the imminent invasion, Katrina forged a new alliance with the Venetians and built an elaborate series of defenses with Ravaldino. The Pope tried to pressure her to surrender her domain, making her all kinds of promises in return. She knew better than to trust her Borgia, but by the fall of 1499, it seemed that the end had finally come. The Pope had allied himself with the France, and Caesar Borgia had appeared in the legion with an army of 12,000 fortified by the addition of 2,000 experienced French soldiers. They quickly took Imola and easily entered the city of Forli itself. All that remained was Rebellino, which by late December was surrounded by Borgia's troops. On December 26, Caesar Borgia himself rode up to the castle on his white horse, dressed all in black, quite a sight. As Katrina looked down from the rampart and contemplated the scene, she thought of her father. It was the it was the anniversary of his assassination. He represented everything she valued, and she would not disappoint him. She was the most like him. She was the most like him of all his children. As he would have done, she had thought ahead. Her plan was to play for time until her remaining allies could come to her defense. She had cleverly fortified Ravaldino in a way that would allow her to keep retreating behind barricades if the walls were breached. In the end, they would have to take the castle from her by force, and she was more than prepared to die in defense of it, sword in hand. As she listened to Borgia address her, it was clear he had come to flatter and flirt. Everyone knew his reputation as a devilish seducer, and many neatly thought Katrina had rather loose moral. She listened and smiled, occasionally reminding him of her past deed and her reputation as Forza's. If he wanted her to surrender, he would have he would have to do better. He persisted in his courtship and asked to parley with her personally. Personally, he persisted in his courtship and asked to parley with her personally. She appeared to finally succumb to his charm. She was a woman. After all, she ordered the drawbridge to be lowered and started walking towards him. She ordered the drawbridge to be lowered and started walking toward him. He continued to press his case, and she gave him certain looks and smiles that that indicated she was falling under his spell. Now only inches away, he reached for her arm, and she playfully withdrew it. They should discuss matter in the castle. She said, "What a coy expression," and began to walk back, inviting him to follow as he stepped into the drawbridge to catch up with her. It began to rise, and he leaped back to the other side just in time. Enraged and embarrassed by the tricks he had tried to play, he swore revenge. মনোজ এই বইটার নাম হলো দ্য লজ অফ হিউম্যান নেচার। During the next few days, he unleashed a torrent of cannon fire at the castle walls. Finally, opening a bridge, Borgia's troops flooded in, led by the more experienced French. It was now hand to hand combat, and at the front of her remaining troops was Katrina. The head of the French troop, Yves d'Algerie, stared at her in amazement as the beautiful countess, her ornamented cuirass over her dress, charged at his men from the front line, handling her sword deftly without a trace of fear. She and her men were about to withdraw further into the castle, hoping to prolong the battle for days, as she had planned, when one of her own soldiers grabbed her from behind and his sword at her throat, marched her over to the other side. Borgia had put a price on her head, and the soldier had betrayed her for the reward. The siege was over, and Borgia himself took possession of his great prize. That night he raped her and kept her confined in his room, trying to make it seem to the world that the infamous warrior countess had willingly succumbed to his charms. Even under duress, she refused to sign away her domain, and so she was brought to Rome and soon thrown into the dreaded prison at Castle Sant'Angelo for one long year in a small and windowless cell. In a small and windowless cell, she endured her loneliness and the endless torture devised by the Borgias. Her health deteriorated and she seemed destined to die in prison. Defiant to the end, but the chivalric French captain Yves d'Algerie had fallen under her spell. He persisted in demanding, in the name of the French king, to have her freed, and he finally succeeded, getting her safe passage to Florence. In retirement from public life, Katrina began to receive letters from men from all parts of Europe. Some had seen her over the years, some had seen her over the year, most had only heard of her. They obsessed over her story, confessed their love, and begged for some memento, some relic to worship. One man who had caught a glimpse of her when she had first come to Rome wrote to her, "If I sleep, it seems that I am with you. If I eat, I leave my food and talk to you. You are engraved in my heart." If I sleep, it seems that I am with you. If I eat, I leave my food and talk to you. You are engraved in my heart. Weakened by her year imprisoned, the Countess died in 1509. Interpretation: the Katrina's Force's time, the roles that a woman could play were severely restricted. Her primary role was to be the good mother and wife. But if unmarried, she could devote her life to religion, or in rare cases, she could become a courtesan. It was as if a circle had been drawing around each and every woman, and she dared not explore beyond that circle. It was in a woman's earliest year and education that she internalized these restrictions. If she studies only a limited number of subjects and practice only certain skills, she couldn't ex- she couldn't expand her role even if she wanted to. Knowledge was power. Even if she wanted to, knowledge was power. Katrina stand out as a remarkable exception, and it was because she benefited from a unique confluence of circumstances. The Sforzas were new to power. They had discovered in their rise to the top that a strong and capable wife could be of great assistance. They developed the practice of training their daughters in hunting and sword fighting as a way to toughen them up and make them fearless, important qualities to have as marriage bonds. Katrina's father, however, took this further. Perhaps he saw in his daughter a female reflection of himself. Giving her his own tutor signaled some sort of identification he felt between them. And so a unique experiment began in the castle at Porta Giovia, isolated from the outside world and allow a tremendous degree of freedom. Katrina could develop herself in any direction she desired. Intellectually, she could explore all form of knowledge. She could indulge herself in all her natural interests. In her case, fashion and the art. In her physical training, she could give free rein to her old blood and adventurous spirit. In this early education, she could bring out the many different sides of her character. And so, when she entered public life at the age of 10, she naturally drifted beyond that restricted circle imposed on women. She could play many roles as a dutiful spouse. She could be the loyal wife, naturally empathetic and caring. She could be the devoted mother. She felt great pleasure in being the most fashionable and beautiful young woman at the People's Court. But when the action of her husband appeared to doom her and her family, she felt herself called to play another role. Trained to think for herself, inspired by her father, she could turn into the daring soldier, bringing an entire city under her control. She could turn into the daring soldier, bringing the entire city into her control. She could become the keen strategist, plotting several moves ahead in a crisis. She could lead her troops, sword in hand. As a young girl, she had fantasized about playing these various roles, and it felt natural and deeply satisfying to do so in real life. We could say of Katrina that she had a feminine spirit with a pronounced masculine undertone, the reverse of her father, and this feminine and masculine trait were belonged together, giving her a unique style of thinking and acting. When it came to ruling, she displayed a high degree of empathy, something quite unusual for the time. When plague struck Forley, she comforted the sick at great risk of her own life. She was willing to suffer from the worst condition in prison and to safeguard the inheritance offered for her children, a rare act of self sacrifice for a person of power, but at the same time, she was a shrewd and tough negotiator, and she had no tolerance for the incompetent or the weak. She was ambitious and proud of it. This chapter is basically upon reconnect to the masculine or feminine within you. In this chapter, it's all about a lady whose name is Katrina. In this chapter, it's elaborate the Katrina's journeys, how she become the how she came into the power after her father and after her husband killed by um, uh, killed by opponent, how she stands strong and st- stand strong in her feet, and she rule and not become weak, and she managed all the things by the opposition. She is a tough lady, basically. At last, she died. She faced many tortures with herself. We could say is doing the heavy lifting. Is doing heavy lifting. She died in jail. How tough is that? Very much. Very much tough for. It's too tough for a lady, because how they treated her, and after that they sent to the prison where no windows and and that jail is quite small, and yet she didn't surrender to us to themselves. It's an exaggeration. People who being treated horrible mentally. Hmm. In place of Katrina, if any other person, no, they will easily surrender for her better life. But Katrina is a tough competitor for the opponent. She choose to die instead of surrender. There's a small fan. It's good for train. And for that places where we have no fans at all. It is hot there. Yeah. See? So cute it's looking now. It's like a toy, but it's working properly. In conflict, she always strategized to outwit her aggressive male opponent and avoid bloodshed. With Caesar Borgia, she tried to lure him onto the draw average using her feminine wiles. Let us say tried to lure him deeper and deeper into the castle, trapping him in a protracted battle, giving her allies plenty of time to rescue her. She nearly succeeded in both efforts. This ability to play many different roles, to blend the masculine with the feminine, with the source of her power. The only time she relinquished. Can you tell me the meaning of relinquished? I'm quite pleased with the film. Huh? Yeah, it's too good and too cute. See, see. Oh, I love it. Relinquish means to give it. Eh? Relinquish means to give it up. Only give it. Give it up. Can you tell me the another meaning of relinquish? Because I didn't understand this one. Or let it. Oh, yeah, yeah. This one is better. Let it go. Please relinquish. Let it go. Yes. Okay. The only time she relinquished this, thank you. The only time she relinquished this was in her marriage to Giacomo Fio. When she fell in love with Fio, she was in a highly vulnerable position. The pressure on her had been immense, dealing with a hopeless and abusive husband, surviving the numerous pregnancies that had worn her down, holding together the tenuous political alliances she had built up, and so suddenly experiencing few adoring attention, it was natural for her to seek a respite from her burden, to relinquish power and control for love, but in narrowing herself down to the role of the devoted wife. She had to depress her naturally expensive character. She had to express her naturally expensive character. She had to expend her energy in placating her husband insecurities. Placating. Can you tell me the meaning of placating? Placating her husband insecurity. In the process, she lost all initiative and paid the price, experiencing a deep. In the process, she lost all initiative and paid the price, experiencing a deep depression that nearly killed her. She learned her lesson and afterward would remain true to herself for the rest of her life. Perhaps what is most surprising about the story of Katrina Sforza is the effect she had on the men and women of her time. We would expect that people would have condemned her as a witch or virago and shunned her for we would expect that people would have condemned her as a witch or virago and shunned her for all her flaunting of gender conventions. Instead, she fascinated almost everyone who came in contact with her. Women admired her strength. Isabella the East, the ruler of Mantua, and her contemporary found her inspiring and brought after her capture by Borgia. If the French criticize the cowardliness of our men, at least they should praise the daring and valor of the Italian women. Men of all types, artist, soldier, priest, nobility, servant, obsessed over her. Even those who wanted to destroy her, like Cesar Borgia, felt an initial attraction and the desire to possess her. Felt an initial attraction and the desire to possess her. Men could talk battle and strategy with her and feel like they were talking to an equal, not like the other women in their life with whom they could barely converse. But more important, they sensed a freedom in her that was exciting. They also had to play a gender role, one that was not a one that was the one that was not as constricting as a woman rule but had its disadvantages. They were expected to be always in control, tough, and indomitable. Secretly, they were drawn to this dangerous woman when secretly they are drawn to this dangerous woman with whom they could lose control. She was not a feminine doll, all passive and existing only to please men. She was unrepressed and authentic, which in them the desire to let go as well, to move past their own, how it is spelled. Hi, कैसे हो आप? Uh, Placating. Uh, Placating. Placating. She was not a feminine doll, all passive and existing only to please men. She was not a feminine doll, all passive and existing only to please men. She was unrepressed and authentic, which inspired in them the desire to let go as well. Not a feminine doll, all passive and existing only to please men. She was unrepressed and authentic, which inspired in them the desire to let go as well, to move past their own constricted rules. Understand, you might like to imagine that much has changed when it comes to gender roles, that the world of Katrina's Forja is too distinct from our own to be relevant. But in thinking so, you would be greatly mistaken. The specific details of gender roles might fluctuate according to culture and time period, but the pattern is essentially the same, and is as follows. We are all born as complete beings with many sides to us. We have qualities of the opposite sex. We have qualities of the opposite sex, but both genetically and from the influence of the parents of the other gender, our character has natural depth and dimension to it. When it comes to boys, studies have shown that early age they are actually more emotionally reactive than girls. They have high degrees of empathy and sensitivity. Girls have an adventurous and exploratory spirit that is natural to them. Girls have an adventurous and exploratory spirit that is natural to them. They have powerful wills which they like to exert in transforming their environment, which they like to exert in transforming the environment. As we get older, however, we have to present to the world a consistent identity. We have to play certain role and live up to certain expectation. We have to trim and lop of natural qualities. Boys lose their rich range of emotions and in the struggle to get ahead, repress their natural empathy. Girls have to sacrifice their assertive sides, struggle to get a girl have to sacrifice their assertive side. They are supposed to be nice, smiling, differential, always considering other people's feeling before their own. A woman can be a boss, but she must be a tender and pliant, never too aggressive. But she must be tender and pliant, never too aggressive. In this process, we become less and less dimensional. We conform to the expected roles of our culture and time period. We lose valuable and rich part to our character. Sometimes we can realize this only when we encounter those who are less repressed and and we feel fascination with them. Certainly, Katrina Sforza had such an effect. There are also many male counterparts to this in history. The 19th century British Prime Minister Benjamin Disraeli, Duke Ellington, John F. Kennedy, David Bowie, all men who display an unmistakable feminine undertone and intrigued people all the more for this. Your task is to let go of the rigidity that takes hold of you as you overridden identify. Acha, as you over identify with the expected gender role. Power lies in exploring that middle range between the masculine and the feminine. In playing against people's expectation, return to the harder, softer side of your character that you have lost or repressed. In relating to people, expand your repertoire by developing greater empathy or by learning to be less differential. When confronting a problem or resistance from other, train yourself to respond in different ways, attacking when you normally defend or vice versa. In your thinking, learn to blend the anal- analytical with the intuitive in order to become more creative. Do not be afraid of bring out the more sensitive or ambitious side to your character. More sensitive and ambitious side of your character. These repressed part of you are yearning to be let out. In the theater of life, expand the roles that you play. Don't worry about people's reaction to any changes in you they sense. Don't worry about people's reaction to any changes in you. Don't worry about people's reaction to any changes in you. In you. This sense, you're not so easy to you're not so easy to categorize, which will fascinate them and give you the power to play with their perception of you, altering them at will, which will fascinate them and give you the power, which will fascinate them and give you the power, which will fascinate them, which will fascinate them and give you the power. You are not so easy to categorize, which will fascinate them and give you the power to play, which will fascinate them and give you the power to play with their perception of you, which will you're not so easy to categorize, which you're not so easy to categorize, which will fascinate them and give you the power to play with their perception of you, the power to play with their perception of you, altering them at will. It is a terrible deception of love that altering them at will. It is a terrible deception of love that begin by engaging us in play not with a woman of the external world but with a doll fashioned in our brain. The only woman, moreover, that we have always at our disposal, the only one we shall ever possess. Marcel Proust. Placating. It's pronounced placating. Yeah, I pronounce the same. Placating. Placating. Yeah, placating. Okay. Ha. मैं हाँ बड़ी जन. हाँ मैं हाँ बड़ी जन. What is the meaning of this word? Placating. for a deceptive motive. To agree with, अच्छा, to agree with everything. To agree with everything someone is saying. Okay, everything someone is saying for a deceptive motive. Okay, getting. I got it. Bracketing, bracketing. किधर गई bracketing? Agree, to agree with to agree with everything. To agree. Keys to human nature. We humans like to believe that we are consistent and mature, and that we have able control over our lives. We make we make decision based on rational consideration on what will benefit us the most. We have free will. We know who we are more or less, but in one particular aspect of life, these but in one particular aspect of life, these self opinion are all easily shattered. But no, all this self opinion are all easily shattered when we fall in love. When in love, we become prey to emotions we cannot control. We make choices of partner we cannot rationally explain. And often these choices end up being unfortunate. Many of us will have at least one successful relationship in our lives, but we will tend to have many more that were decidedly unsuccessful, that ended unhappily. And often we repeat the same types of bad choices of partner, as if compelled by some inner demon. We like to tell ourselves in retrospect that when we were in love, a type of a type of temporary madness overcame us. We think of such moment as representing the exception, not the rule, to our character. We think of such moment as representing the exception, not the rule, to our character. But let us entertain for the moment the opposite possibility. In our conscious day-to-day life, we are sleepwalking, unaware of who we really are. We present a form of reasonableness to the world, and we mistake the mask for reality. When we fall in love, we are actually being more ourselves. The mask slips off. We realize then how deeply unconscious force determine many of our actions. We are more connected to the reality of the essential irrationality in our nature. Let us look at some of the common changes that occur when we are in love. Normally, our minds are in a state of distraction. The deeper we fall in love, however, the more our attention is completely absorbed in one person. The more our attention is completely absorbed in one person. We become obsessive. We like to present a particular appearance to the world, one that highlight our strength. When in love, however, opposite traits often come to be the fore. A person who is normally strong and independent can suddenly become rather helpless, dependent, and hysterical. A nurturing, empathetic person can suddenly become tyrannical, demanding, and self absorbed. An adult, we feel relatively mature and practical, but in love, we can suddenly regress to behavior that can only be seen as childish. Regress. We experience fear and insecurities that are generally exaggerated. Experience fear and insecurities that are generally exaggerated. We feel terror at the thought of being abandoned, like a baby who has been left alone for a few minutes. We have wild mood swing from love to hate, from trust to paranoia. Paranoia. Normally, we like to imagine that we are good judges of others' people character. Once infatuated or in love, however, we mistake the narcissist for a genius. We mistake the narcissist for a genius. The suffocator for a nurturer, the slacker for the exciting rebel, the control freak for the protector. Other can often see the truth and try to disabuse us for our fantasies. Other can often see the truth and try to disabuse us for our fantasies. Other can often see the truth and try to disabuse us for our fantasy, but we won't listen. And what is worse, we will often continue to make the same type of mistaken judgment again and again. In looking at these altered states, we might be tempted to describe them as forms of possession. We are normally rational person A, but under the influence of an infatuation, irrational person B begins to emerge. At first, A and B can fluctuate and even blend into each other, but the deeper we fall in love, the more it is person B who dominates. Person B see qualities in people that are not there, acts in ways that are counterproductive and even self-destructive and even sensitive is quite immature and unrealistic expectation and make decisions that are is quite unrealistic expectation and make decisions that are it's quite unrealistic expectation and make decisions that are often mysterious later on to person A and make decisions that are often mysterious later on to person A. When it comes to our behavior in this situation, we never really completely understand what is happening. Too much of our unconscious is at play, and we have too much of our unconscious is at play, and we have no rational access to it possess. But the eminent psychologist. But the eminent psychologist Carl Jung, who analyzed over the of his very long career, thousands of men and women whose stories of painful love affair, who analyzed over the course of his very long career, thousands of men and who analyzed over the course of his very long career, thousands of men and women with stories of painful love affair offered perhaps the most profound explanation for what happened to us when we fall in love. According to Jung, we are actually in such moment he gave the entity person B that takes hold of us the name anima for the male and the animus for the female. This entire exists in our unconscious but comes to the surface when a person of the opposite sex fascinates us. The falling is the origin of the anima and the animas and how they operate. They are human being and they are human being and then they are human animal. Most can't tell the difference. No, no, there is a huge difference in animal or human being. According to me. They look the same, but they behave different. We all possess hormones and genes of the opposite sex. We all possess hormones and genes of the opposite sex. This contrasexual, we all possess hormones and genes of the opposite sex. These contrasexual traits are in the minority to a greater or lesser extent, depending on the individual, but they are within us all and they form a part of our character, equally significant as the influence on our psychic of the parent of the opposite sex, from whom we absorb feminine or masculine traits. In our earliest year, we were completely open and susceptible to the influence of others. The parent of the opposite sex was our first encounter with someone dramatically different from us. As we related to their alien nature, much of our personality was formed in response, becoming more dimensional and multifaceted. With parents of the same sex, there is often a level of comfort and immediate identification that does not require the same adaptive energy. For instance, some boys are often comfortable expressing emotions and traits that they have learned from the mother, such as overt affection, empathy, and sensitivity. Some girls, conversely, are often comfortable expressing traits they have learned from the father, such as aggressive boldness, intellectual rigor, and physical prose. prose. Each child may also naturally possess these opposite gender traits in him or herself. In addition, each parent will also have a shadow side that the child must assimilate or deal with. For instance, a mother may be narcissistic rather than empathetic, and a father may be domineering or weak rather than protective and strong. Children must adapt to this. In any event, the boy and the girl will internalize the positive and the negative qualities of the parent of the opposite sex in the ways that are unconscious and profound. And the association with the parent of the opposite sex will be charged with all kinds of emotion, physically and sensual connection. And the opposite sex will be charged with all kinds of emotion. And the association with the parents of the opposite sex will be charged with all kinds of emotion, physical and sensual connection, tremendous feeling of excitement, fascination, or disappointment at once was not given. Soon, however, comes a critical period in our early lives in which we must separate from our parent and forge our identity. We must separate from our parent and forge our identity. Soon, however, comes a critical period in our early lives. However, comes a critical period in our early life in which we must separate from our parents and forge our identity. Okay. Thank you for being with me and helping me a lot in this reading. Thank you. Thanks a lot to all of you. So that's all for today. We will meet again tomorrow. Tata. Bye bye. Good night and take care.